Joining right away. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning for those of you who are joining. Welcome. All right. We'll get going in about a minute or two. Just checking. Julian, do our participants have access to the chat function in this?
No. Yes, sorry.
I
I'm not
do.
sure.
Maybe if people can just check if they've got access
Yes,
to the
there
chat.
is an everyone channel, so yes.
Yeah. All right. Seems to be. Oh, there you go. Welcome. Hi, Philip. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Olga. Emilian. Hi, Emilian. Yeah, they're great. So as we begin the webinar, if you've got questions, you're very welcome to put them in the chat function as we go along. Hopefully, I'll notice them, but I'll pause at some points just to check for questions. Leonard, will we receive the presentation in an email? That's a
So
question.
no, we don't send the slides. You will receive, if you stay until the end, the recording to the
Yeah.
webinar.
Isn't there
Yes,
a report as
email.
well, Julian?
That's not the same thing, but yeah, we can
Okay.
talk. And just to add to Michael's comment, on top of the chat, there is also obviously the question and answer section directly on Zoom. You can ask questions in there as well.
Okay. Q&A. There is there. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get going. Thank you for those of you who've joined on time. We have a 45-minute webinar this morning, and hopefully we finish early. There'll be time for questions towards the end as well. So welcome. I'm Michael Bunting, and my partner Julian Raymond is on the other side. This is our business is a 22-year-old business in the field of leadership and culture. Many of you know this, but those of you new, just to give you some sense, and we've just launched a brand new updated assessment that you're seeing on the screen there, the red and green circle called the Leadership Growth Profile. I'll take you a bit through that, and then we'll give you some really interesting and useful data on what we've seen in the last 6 months that's driving the outcomes that leaders want to achieve. Again, those of you who are joining, you're very welcome to put questions in the chat function or even in the Q&A. So what are we going to cover? We're going to look at the leadership behaviors that drive high performance, and we're going to look at the leadership behaviors that kill performance. And then we're going to check in how do you guarantee a high performance rating. And I'll share a bit of that. We've actually had the privilege of having some very large multinational clients give us their confidential performance ratings of their team, the real performance ratings that determine people's bonuses and promotions and opportunities. And we've also assessed all of those leaders on our assessment, and we've done all the correlation data on that, and that's been given us some really interesting stuff I will show you today. Now, just a little bit of history again for those of you who don't know our work. The first book I wrote was with Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. A lot of people who are in the leadership field are possibly not aware of this. Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner have the world's most researched leadership model called the Leadership Challenge, and their assessment's the LPI. And that's got about 7 million people on the database now, and it's had more independent academic studies done on it than any other leadership model on earth. And my first book I wrote was about how that same model is applied in an ANZ context, but we actually work all around the world. In fact, I think me personally, at least 80% of my work is not in Australia, it's all around the world. And then we followed that up with a book called The Mindful Leader in 2016, because what we found interesting with Kouzes and Posner's work is they can give you an incredibly good snapshot of what great leadership looks like and research that. But And we wanted to take the subject deeper on how to help leaders transform and the mindset work behind the practices, because we've been in the trenches helping leaders develop and grow for so long, and also bring in the aspect of consciousness or awareness. And so we added 2 practices to the 5 that Kouzes and Posner researched. We added self-awareness as a key element, or self-regulation, and we added accountability as a key additional practice. And to this day, accountability is the one that most of our clients want to work on. And then in 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we published this book, Vertical Growth. And it was the question, trying to answer the question for people: how do you actually create transformation reliably in leaders? How do you get people to actually sustainably change behaviors that matter? And this is the research, and that drove part of what you're seeing today. Now, let's just look at a brief concept so you understand how we're assessing and what we're thinking about. The first thing you'll see the name of our business is TripleGoal. We changed the name of the business only about 3 or 4 months ago. But we had there was an interesting research project that came out that said, that maintained that 25% of the most engaged people at work are also the lowest performers at work. Now, we always assumed that an engagement score was about the best benchmark we could put on our work. In other words, can we help organizations and leaders improve their engagement score? And we did that incredibly reliable. Many of our clients won Great Place to Work awards or the like. But then we asked a deeper question: well, can we change the performance levels in a business, not just engagement levels? We can't rely that high engagement equals high performance. And slowly we began to formulate what we call the triple goal, which is the so what of leadership. And you'll see it there. It's great performance, great learning. Learning is all about agility, innovation, but also the ability to not repeat mistakes. And then a great workplace, which is what we sometimes call joy at work, which is classic engagement, mental health, inclusion type scores. And we present that if a leader said, for example, I'm working on my communication skills, we would ask them back, so what? Can you tell me how that's going to improve the performance in your team, improve the agility and learning in your team, and improve the workplace engagement in your team? If you can't, that's not the right practice. But this measure or this benchmark is true of anything. Or if you were putting a new technology system in your business, if you were restructuring the business, the bottom line is, does it improve performance, which is profitability really in for-profit businesses? It's service outcomes typically in non-profit businesses. Are you improving the agility and learning, and are you improving the workplace experience? Basically, those 3 things with a triple goal are the only things that matter for any business. And as many of you would know, for most organizations, certainly in the short term, it's all about performance. Then when we look conceptually at what we call the red zone and the green zone in our work, is the red zone are behaviors that provide short-term results or comfort, but drag the triple goal down, right? So the red zone is driven by things like image management, avoidance, approval, defensiveness, aggression, and fear. An easy example of a red zone behavior would be avoiding an honest conversation in a meeting. It provides short-term comfort. It's easier and more comfortable not to address something in an honest conversation in a meeting, but of course it's going to affect performance, learning, and ultimately workplace trust in the long term. So that's a classic example of a red zone behavior. What's fascinating is that probably 98% of workplaces don't measure red zone behavior. Red zone behavior is underground in organizations. If there is red zone behavior, it comes out in political discussions and it's in blame discussions. Nobody personally tends to believe they have red zone behaviors. And then the values of the organization are sort of a brand, and which you can never really reach, because until you can speak about and address red zone behaviors, you're going to struggle. In fact, if you look at adult development research, it's going to be impossible for you to actually sustainably live your values as an organization, or for that matter, as a leader. And in the green zone, conceptually, and we're going to give you the data behind these, are cultivated behaviors, values-based behaviors that do drive performance, learning, and workplace engagement. They would be things like the honest conversation or non-defensiveness or inclusiveness. There's multiple behaviors in the green zone, but they generally take care and they generally take effort to build and they take definition. If you take a non-leadership example, it'll be a little bit like being a husband or a wife in a marriage or a parent. It's easy to be a parent, easy-ish to be a parent or a husband or a wife, but it's not easy to be a great parent or a great husband or wife. That takes conscious effort. And that's really what the green zone represents. It's conscious effort to be great. Now, we have been measuring the green zone for many years in our work, but only recently, and working with the red zone for many years, but only recently brought a whole measurement system to the red zone. And this circle you're seeing here is the 360 assessment that we've designed. This is how the report looks. And we measure the red zone more technically, so to help organizations and leaders understand what exactly they're doing in the red zone and what its impact is. I'll cover a little bit more in detail in a second. And then we've got 13 dimensions in the red zone, 50 behaviors associated with those, and negative 44.57% correlation to performance. What that means is our research is now showing that the more leaders do the red zone, the worse their performance outcomes become. Now, what we mean by performance outcomes is their personal performance rating in their organization. It's limiting their career, basically, red zone behavior. And green zone, there's 3 areas, 7 practices. I've mentioned these come from the Kouzes and Posner work and our own. There's 56 behaviors, and that correlates at just under 50% to performance, meaning that for every 10% you would improve your green zone score, you would improve your performance rating by 5%. More or less, we could assert that great leadership is 50% competence and 50% the green zone behaviors, but in order to score high in the green zone, you have to score low on the red zone. So for those of you, if you're interested in the research report that Julian mentioned at the beginning, this data, you can download it here. You grab your phone and QR code that, I can't remember that barcode there. I'm just going to check if there are any questions so far. I don't think there are, or any comments. No. Okay, great. Again, just a reminder, if you've got any questions, you're very welcome to put them in. Okay, and Julian's just added the link in the chat function to that QR code there you see, if you're interested in the report. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the red zone, just so that you understand what the data is telling us and the philosophy behind the red zone. You'll see there's 3 main categories behind the red zone: approval, control, and security. Just an FYI, there's brain science behind the red zone, not the term the red zone, but this is what's associated with what the fast pathway in the brain, and it's reflex behavior. It's habitual, categorized reflex behavior we all have. And it's necessary to some degree, but it's impossible to grow when you're in a reflex style behavior or an habitual behavior. At the core of all red zone behavior are these 3 human needs: approval, control, and security. So we would assert that every human being needs approval. They need love, they need connection, and they need approval. Like we as a provider of assessments and research, we need our clients, our coaches, to approve of us. They need to like us. They need to want to work with us. So approval is a necessary function. I would like my children to approve of me, my wife, etc., etc. So approval is a fundamental need in human beings, and there's nothing wrong with it. The same goes for control. In order to do your job, you need a degree of autonomy and control. Sometimes in order to get things done efficiently through a team, you need control. And it's basically a sense of freedom and control, right? We all need these, and the same applies to security. So we all need to feel emotionally secure, we need to feel psychologically secure, and we need to feel financially and physically secure. So security is a fundamental need. So why are we measuring behaviors that are associated with something negative? And this is the interesting piece, that the red zone, to a certain degree, up to maybe the 30th percentile, what you're seeing here on the screen is a percentile ranking. The yellow lines, if that's because people ask, what are those yellow lines? That's the person's self-rating. So it's the comparative. It's effectively saying that the more you do these behaviors, the more you undermine the need. So what I often do as a kind of, I joke about myself, is that one of my early childhood behaviors was self-promoting. So my parents were busy, very busy at work, and I was one of those, what some people call a latchkey kid, where when I would get home, there would be no parents around. When they were at home, they were checked out because they were exhausted. And so how did I get attention at home? I did it through telling my parents. I'd come home and I'd tell my parents, I did well in a test. I won the swimming race, and I learned early on in my life that telling my parents good things I had done got some attention, got some approval, got some quality of love from them, and it met my needs for approval. That self-promotion pattern of behavior became embedded in my ego structure, if you will, and it didn't suddenly magically change when I turned 18 or 25. And so now it can look like me telling people that I'm a best-selling author and I've done this and my achievements. And the irony is that the more I self-promote, the less likely people are to approve of me. But a tiny bit. So at the beginning of this webinar, I shared with you that these are the best-selling books I've written, and that's with Kouzes and Posner. That's designed to establish some degree of credibility, if you know, that our work is science-based, it's evidence-based, and that we've done this for a while. So, i.e., you could trust this content. But if I keep asserting my prowess, my authorship, my books, etc., very, very quickly, particularly with an Australian audience, my approval will plummet. And so you can see the limitation of just using one example of a red zone behavior. The more I do it, the more I undermine approval. One other example we use that's easy to get your head around is defensiveness. By the way, all 13 do this, but just to give you a sense. So if you take defensiveness as an example, defensiveness, when we're being defensive around feedback, for example, we think we're protecting our security. We're defensive because we're feeling unsafe, or we're protecting ourselves. The irony is that the more defensive we are, the less able we are to hear constructive feedback that enables us to grow or improve. And we ultimately are undermining our security in our job. If we become defensive with clients or customers, we undermine our financial security in that work. So even though defensiveness gives us the feeling of we're protecting ourselves, it ultimately undermines security. So there's easy examples. So, and if the structure of the red zone is built off, again, I'm seeing some interesting things around human LSI. I'll come to those in a second. It started off with us doing a tremendous amount of work in the red zone with clients and mapping all the red zone behaviors in their business at scale. And very soon we started seeing these patterns coming up, right, which we've now formalized. This red zone, however, also comes from three large bodies of work. It comes from just fundamental stress theory, right? Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So approval-based behaviors are freeze and fawn behaviors. Fight behaviors are the control behaviors, and flight behaviors tend to be under the security behaviors. And then you've got Karen Horney's work around how people relate to each other under stress. And they typically do one of three things: move towards, move against, and move away. So move towards is the approval, move against is the control, the aggression, and move away are the security-based behaviors. And then finally, if any of you know the Enneagram, which is the most sophisticated body of work on understanding vertical growth and ego structure, we've also wound the whole Enneagram work and some of the amazing research behind that work into this as well. And that informs some of the individual patterns of behavior. There's 9 ego structures built into this work. That's the history. And how does it impact? So we've had a large number of leaders, as I mentioned, from global organizations from around the world who gave us their confidential performance ratings. And this is what the red zone data tells us. It tells us that there's a negative 44% correlation to that person's performance rating. There's a negative 36.63% to their leadership effectiveness rating. Remembering leadership effectiveness is also influenced by green zone. It's also influenced by competence. There's a negative 38% on engagement. So basically, the more you're doing the red zone behaviors, the more you're harming engagement. What's significant, which we haven't unpacked in detail for you, what's so significant is also the passive approval-based red zones harm engagement. That overly nice behaviors have a dramatically negative impact. And we experientially have seen the most dysfunctional teams we've worked with, I've worked with in my career, have been overly nice, not overly direct or controlling, interestingly enough. A negative 44% on rating on psychological safety. We've done a lot of research on psychological safety. We measure all 4 layers of psychological safety in our work. And what's so fascinating is we found that being nice and being kind are actually come quite far down on psychological safety. The 2 elements that have the most effect on psychological safety in the green zone and reducing red is letting people know how they're progressing against key goals and targets, and that the leader walks their talk. And then it has a negative 43% correlation on mental health, which is enormous. And this is a very stunning statistic that this means the direct reports of bosses, mental health has a negative 43% correlation. So the more the boss is doing the behavior, the red zone, the more the mental health of their team is getting hurt. Okay, so I'm just going to stop there and check if there are any questions. So Ronel and the LSI, yes. So the LSI, the 2 instruments that have a circle that we're, and there's multiple of them, are obviously the LSI and the leadership circle. What we found, just so you're aware, and you'll see this in the green zone, many years ago, probably you, like many others, have worked with the LSI and the leadership circle. We found it quite frustrating with the LSI, because the LSI doesn't present a leadership model. It doesn't present a disciplined set of leadership practices. And we couldn't find a process, because we have a disciplined set of leadership practices that give you the practical, clear do's and techniques of great leadership. The LSI is more of a psychological assessment, and a wonderful one at that, but it doesn't translate easily into the disciplined research evidence-based leadership practices in the do, and it certainly doesn't support a leadership model being embedded in an organization. But that's what we found working at scale. And in a not dissimilar way, we was challenged with the leadership circle, because the leadership model is so complex, and because we tended to do work at scale, we just couldn't embed it in a simple way. And so we found a lot of struggle. We continued working with our own evidence-based model on the LPI, but we introduced the red zone as a concept already about 5 years ago, and we were working with it, and slowly but surely these patterns emerged, and we recognized we needed to measure them with more discipline and present them as we do. So here's the interesting, and here's for some of you, I think, what you may have come for. What are the specific behaviors that have the greatest damage on performance outcomes? This is specifically on performance outcomes, this data. And I'll read them out to you, because if you're looking at this on a phone or something, you may not read these. Responds to challenging feedback with aggression or blame, that's a defensive behavior. Dominates meetings and conversations is a controlling behavior. Quick to point out errors is also, it's perfectionistic behaviors. Is guarded or defensive, there we go, we've got defensiveness again. Shuts down new ideas and experience the need of protecting risks. This is a cautious, a flat behavior. Demands extreme deadlines and targets is objectify. It's one of the aggressive control behaviors. Is critical and judgmental. I'll just pause at 6. 6 is a really interesting one. Demands extreme deadlines and targets. And if you look at how the three different categories of performance rating, which we've normalized in the research we've done, is you would expect perhaps that, you know, if you lead it, your performance is lagging, you should demand more extreme deadlines and targets. But the data is very, very clear. That's a bad idea. It actually reduces performance. They're all the same. Being critical and judgeable reduces performance. Needing to be the smartest person in the room is a self-promoting behavior. Lacks passion is a passive behavior, and then makes excuses or blames is defensive. What's so striking for us is that 3 of the top 10 scores are defensive behaviors. And this correlates with our work on an anecdotal basis that defensiveness is your #1 enemy to growth. If you look at the principles of growth, defensiveness utterly kills growth. It's impossible to grow as a human being while simultaneously engaging in defensive behaviors. So, so Lee, the intent of the performance column, these are people mark the red zone lower than the green zone in terms of, because we ask, it's a 10-point scale rating. Performance level 3, 2, 1, the 3 columns you see, performance level 3 is, this is the leaders who scored highest performance rating in their organizations, right? Some of our organizations gave us 5-point scale rating. Some of them gave us 3-point. We took that data and just normalized it into 3. And so effectively the first column there, performance rating 3, this is what the highest performance leaders score on these statements out of 10. The average 2 is what the middle of the road leaders, if you will, performance rating wise score out of 10. And then the 1s are the lowest performance ratings, right? These are the worst performance leaders measured in this database. And what you'll see, the reason why we're showing you these numbers is the progression of increased red zone behavior on that statement. So if you take the top one, response to challenging feedback, high performing leaders on average score 1.57 out of 10 on this, medium performers 2.13, and average performers 3.69. To give you a sense of what 3.69 out of 10 is percentile wise, it's probably about 80th percentile. People score their leaders lower on the red zone. They're more forgiving because they're such striking statements, right? Like, oh my God, the aggression. No, it's 5 out of 10. But when they're scoring people say 5 out of 10, that's a very high mark for red zone. It's a high percentile. So the reason why we're showing you those columns is to give you the sense that, oh, there is a direct correlation between higher performing leaders not doing this as much as lower performing leaders. If you just compare the 3 versus the 1, you get a very striking difference between the 2. That's why, Lee, I hope that answers your question on why we. Great, thank you. Now, the green zone of leadership, what we've noticed, we've just finished generating a, let me just pause before I show you to not distract you. We've just, Swarovski, the Swarovski crystal is one of our global clients, and we've just finished designing. They have their own leadership model. It's got 9 leadership practices, and they wanted to use our assessment. So we created a tailored assessment with the red and green for Swarovski, and using their 9 leadership principles, but using all of our assessment statements. So Swarovski get the best of both worlds. They get their leadership model, but they get all of our data, all our global norm data, and our tried and tested statements. And I'm using this example because we found over and over again that leadership models are all so similar to each other. And we found that our leadership model fits most other leadership models. We're not precious about the leadership model itself. It's the application and simplicity of the model that matters. And so when we look at our model, we've put it's under 3 fundamental categories that leaders need to do well. They need to align and inspire. So that's, if you see in the inner circle on here, that's align. And to align and inspire, you need to inspire a vision, and you need to lead from values. It creates a consistency of alignment. We know where we're going and we know how we need to behave, and we trust our leader to do that. And so we're all aligned. Great. The second element is achieve, over here in the middle. And effectively, you could look at it as a simple way. It's carrot and stick. To drive performance in a team, you need to create high levels of accountability. There's also a nuance to accountability. You need to take accountability for growth. And you also need to appreciate, care, praise, reward. So that's the very simplistic way of saying stick is accountability. It's not really stick and carrot, but the combination to drive high performance is high accountability, high appreciation type of leadership and workplaces. That balance is really difficult to do, but leaders who get that balance right are exceptional because they're incredibly emotionally intelligent, but they're also fearless and values-based. And then the last category is grow. So that's a part of growing the business and also growing people. And you do that through empowerment, which is coaching, mentoring, helping people find their best, and dealing with complexity, which is the cultivate curiosity, creating agility in learning environments is, this cross collaboration in here too, in what we call cultivate curiosity in simple terms. The center of the circle is also a green zone, which is all about self-regulation. We don't have time to go into that in detail, but in simple terms, in order to be able to see your red zone behavior, catch it, and then transition into green zone in real time takes self-regulation. And that's why self-regulation is so fundamentally important. And it's the center, and it's not necessarily a leadership model. We're about to do another tailored leadership model for another global organization, and they don't have a self-regulate, but we're keeping it in the middle, and they've got 5 leadership practices that match the 6 that we've got here. And then you'll see the data is extraordinary. So 50% of a performance rating correlates. So this is telling us just how significant, as I said earlier, behavior is. One of the common questions we ask leaders is, so basically what this data is indicating, it's not perfect, but it's indicating that half of your annual performance rating that determines your bonus is determined by your competence, your technical competence, and your behavior. How much time did you spend this year looking at your behavior and improving it? And usually it's very little in leaders, and that data is quite striking. What was so interesting for us is several of the organizations we measured hadn't done any leadership development work. We just did the data, and they were very gratified in a way. They're going, okay, well, at least somehow we're building in, we're intuiting that leadership behavior still drives the right performance outcomes, even if we're not applying it that well. So yes, exactly. And then you can read the other pieces of data. But just to give you a sense, for example, on engagement, when Kouzes and Posner did their research on leadership, they found that nothing drives engagement more than leadership. Your boss's behavior, ping pong tables and flexible working hours, etc., all make a very, very, very low difference. But leadership behavior is by far and away the biggest external reference to a person's engagement score at work. And then obviously salary matters too, and job fit matters, but that's an internal thing, job fit. That's for that person usually to decide. And then salary matters, but it doesn't matter if the person perceives they're being paid fairly. Then it's all about leadership behavior. And what this is telling us is that the leadership behaviors we measure really matter for engagement scores. And then I thought I just want to complicate things, because I thought I would share the top 5 behaviors in the green zone that make the biggest positive impact on performance. The first is attentive and focused. This is not surprising to us because we get so many complaints nowadays around inattentive leaders, multitasking leaders, leaders not showing up for their direct reports and really paying attention. Perhaps some of you may even be in this webinar while you're multitasking, doing other things. That's eroding your attention and focus, something so simple as that. And then we've got holding people to account, which is the tough side of leadership, but then paradoxically, just beneath that, treating people with care and respect. Then we've got getting important things addressed, which is another, what we often think of as a tough, direct, effective leadership style. And then lastly, sets a personal example of what's expected. And why we're just sharing with you 5, and then you see is just how paradoxical and difficult great leadership is. Because at one level, you've got to be attentive in meetings and still get important things addressed on time. And often that's what's driving inattention. You've got to be tough. You've got to hold people accountable. And interestingly enough, we find that holding people accountable for behavior, because we measure both behavior and performance, holding people accountable for behavior is more important to team members than holding people accountable for performance. As I said, we measure both. That's the other performance one didn't make the top 10 even. And then treating people with care and respect is like, oh wow, how do you do that? Well, you've got to hold people accountable and treat them with care and respect, which takes a lot of maturity, and it takes a lot lower red zone. If you've got high red zone behavior, it's next to impossible to balance those two. This is what we're seeing in our data. It gets important things addressed on time is obviously just an efficiency thing, and sets a personal example what's expected. For those of you who've been exposed to our work, this is an astonishing piece that we keep finding. So this is your boss walks the talk. What we've one of our favorite questions to ask leaders is, if leaders need to walk the talk, what's the talk you're trying to walk? And they usually sit there in stunned silence when we ask this question. We found about 1% of leaders we work with actually have a clear talk that they're walking and have a consciousness around it. They've got a deliberate practice around it. They're aware when they're not walking their talk. They can cite examples of it. They're aware of when they're being challenged, but they still walk their talk. 99% of leaders we work with are clueless around this area. And what's driving their behavior are the red zone considerations of approval, control, and security. That's what's really driving it, not values. Okay. What happens? Sorry, I'll just come to John's question there. So if you guys are checking where I'm getting these questions, that are in the chat function. I haven't looked at the Q&A. I don't think there is anything. Leaders in the green zone will be those who can engage in uncomfortable conversations without making them feel unsafe. Correct. John, incorrect, which is tricky. It's correct and it's incorrect. What we found is that, let me just come back to, I'll just blank that. What we found is that when leaders ask us the question, how do I have tough conversations with my direct reports, growth conversations, performance-based conversations, behavior conversations, in ways that guarantee my direct reports feel safe, our response to that is that's impossible. There's no way you can guarantee people feeling safe. If you do that, and we, by the way, we teach a model based on nonviolent communication, what we call mindful conversations. So we teach people the skill sets to do this. You cannot have, the moment you're trying to guarantee a person feels safe, you're typically in the passive, people-pleasing, approval-based red zone behaviors, because you've externalized. You're saying what matters is how this person receives it, and let me try and adjust how they receive it. That's what we would not regard that as technically correct way to do it. The correct way to do it is checking is how can I deliver it from the green zone? So can I deliver it from non-reactivity, not labeling, not aggression? Can I deliver it with grace, clarity, objectivity? That sits under the holding people accountable in the green zone, right? Or doing growth-based empowerment in the green zone. Yes, it's absolutely your responsibility to deliver feedback in a graceful, constructive way that may still make people feel unsafe. Marshall Rosenberg, the guy who invented nonviolent communication, was once asked this question: how do you speak to people in a way that guarantees they feel safe and they never get upset? And Marshall's response was, that's easy. You need to just become a good dead person, just die, because it's never going to happen. As he put it, I could sneeze and I could upset people. My accent could upset people. There's just no way you can live. And when leaders ask us that question, we immediately red flag it to them. Hold on a second. You're trying to orient your leadership towards how other people feel. That's an external reference. That's less mature than an internal reference. Much better for you to ask your direct reports, am I delivering this feedback constructively, objectively? Yes, good. Then your feelings and your fear are your business. I can empathize with you, but they're your business to deal with, not mine. Hopefully that makes sense. Great, thanks. So offense or feeling unsafe is always subjective. Absolutely, it's subjective. However, John, what a lot of people would do with that, what you just said, is they would say they could deliver it unskillfully in controlling or aggression or perfectionistic or critical ways, red zone, and then they could use that as a justification if the person gets upset. It's like, oh, well, I'm just, your feelings are not my business. So it's tricky. Which is why we measure both red and green. The person needs to understand the difference between delivering green zone feedback and people being upset versus delivering red zone feedback, because you are responsible for the red zone, and that's the tricky element of it, right? And which is why you want to understand both. Often what we'll ask is when a person they can't differentiate between it, we'll ask the question, when does feedback for you become constructive to destructive? What happens when it goes from constructive to destructive? What's the difference between the two? And they have a really hard time describing that. understanding the red and green and the behaviors makes it way easier for that person to track that difference. We even measure that in a sub-report in the 360, where we measure what we call healthy green zone versus toxic green zone in the nice category, and healthy green zone and toxic red zone in the holding people account, what we call the tough nice. So toxic nice versus healthy nice, toxic tough versus healthy tough, and that nuance. And that's a really important educational piece for leaders. Evelyn, let me come back to your question in a second. I just wanted to finish one other thing. So what happens, and then we'll and put the report. What happens if an organization reduces red and increases green? So what we were fortunate to work. We work with, as I said, many companies around the world. This was Sanofi, their Canadian division, and we set upon defining a triple goal for them and mapping their red zone as an organization and mapping what they think they should cultivate in their green zone. And the theory was, if you reduce red and you increase green, what hypothetically should happen is you should improve performance, innovation, and learning and engagement, just like the models I showed you. What happened was, within 9 months, the performance grew dramatically. It went up. Their performance was 70%. And in a like-for-like, it was the top of 11 peer countries. The launch, which is a measure of agility, the ability to launch products, was 400% above their business case. And their engagement score had flatlined at 6 out of 10 for 5 years running, went from 6 to 8.4 out of 10 in an incredibly short period. It's very rare to see performance lift so quickly alongside engagement, right? There's often a feeling of dilemma, tough, nice, dilemma. And they won a bronze award for sales, right? So they submitted a leadership culture project as a sales award. They were the only submission out of 330 around the world to submit, saying, we're going to work on our culture and our leaders as a means to drive sales and performance. And they won the bronze award. They came third out of 330 submissions for a sales award. Therefore, in proving, if you shift your culture, it can be a key strategy to drive sales performance in a business, which is phenomenal. How do you guarantee a high performance rating? So this is an extra piece of information that's interesting. So we sometimes slice the data where we go, okay, if someone scored 3 out of, what are the deadly sins of red zone, right? And so we find that if anyone scores 3 out of 10 or lower on these, when these behaviors score 3 out of 10 or less from direct reports, a leader's performance is higher, really high. So what this is saying is, in these 4 things, being critical, basically, right? And then shutting new ideas in terms of being overly cautious and pushing these behaviors. If you start doing these in higher than 3 out of 10, you just basically kill performance in your business. In your team. And then these ones here, the green zone, these are the ones when you do really well, 8 out of 10 or above. Turns out high performing leaders are all 8 out of 10 or above on these behaviors, right? They're empathetic, they're caring, they're attentive, but they also they create a lot of clarity in their business. And I think that may relate to Emily, and is that they are high performing. And if you score below 8, there wasn't a single high performing leader who scored less than 8 out of 10 on these. So these are like a quick ready, like, okay, hold on a second. What do I need to do immediately to make sure I'm a high performing leader? Just to give you a sense, as we draw to a close, and I'll take some final questions, is the whole report that we do in the assessment is quite sophisticated but simple. We've had 70,000 completed evaluations up until this point. So it's a very large database of leadership, and it's trying to embrace the idea of deep psychological work combined with practical outcomes. As I mentioned earlier, it's where we were struggling with the LSI and Leadership Circle. We're like, these are not getting us the clarity we need, but we also want our previous instrument wasn't giving us the psychological depth that we've all been working with for over 2 decades. But then what we found really challenging with those tools is that there's not a seamless transition in simple language from assessment to development, right? Now we have a matrix, red and green zone matrix, which this assessment gives you the clarity of what's going on in your red zone and what you need to do more in the green zone. What no assessment can give you is helping you understand the underlying drivers, right? The immunity to change, the vertical growth, the adult work. And in our system, we go, here's your top. We have a matrix structure, then also supports you to investigate what's going underneath in a beautifully structured way in the same design language, color language that is the assessment. And it's fully seamless. It's just this one seamless transition from assessment into development, because we're always asking the question, why assess? So what? Or I'm doing X green zone and I'm trying to reduce X red zone. So what? Like, so what? So always so what? And so the so what always drives us to, if you assess, then you have to develop, because so what if you've assessed but nothing happens with the assess? And then if you're going to develop, you need to drive outcomes on the triple goal. It can't just be generic develop. It has to be clocked and connected to performance outcomes, agility and learning outcomes, and workplace outcomes. Again, otherwise, so what? And hence everything is so structured in the process. And now we're providing tools for this. Now we are offering, if anyone's interested in looking at this and working with this tool themselves, because it's a new launch, this beautiful new structure, we are offering a free, I think Julian will probably put the links in the assessment for those of you who are coaches, or you've got a small organization, large organization, you can get 5 assessments at no fee. And not only that, you can get the silver package, which is, it's a seamless transition. It explains in short little animated videos how to read your report. It helps you make sense of your results in an educated way, and lands you on an actually decent action plan without even needing a coach. But it's usually then associated with a 90-minute coaching session from someone internal. And the coach, even to be used this effectively, doesn't even have to understand how to read the report, because that's all provided. Just to help the leader have a deeper understanding of their learning grid and what they need to do differently in the coming months to actually get better results on their triple goal. Now, Julian's put those links in the assessment. Lee, Ronell, was it Lee? I'm not sure I understand how Lee's performance rating would be higher if their teams are 3. Okay, I think Julian's responded to that, Lee. Let me just say negative behaviors. Let me see there. Thank you. Thanks, Vandana. Nice to have you here. Lee, you're going to process. I understand there's a lot in that. Scoring 3 out of 10 below in the red zone means you're okay. So Ronald, yeah, it's also because it's not, I'm not sure I understand how a leader's performance rating can be higher if their teams are 3 out of 10. So the performance rating, the red is a negative correlation, Lee. So the lower you are in the red zone, the better. The higher you are in the green zone, the better. So what you typically see is a correlation between, the ideal leader is low red, high green, right? So the lower the red goes, the higher the performance is. That's what the data is telling us. The higher the green goes, the higher the performance rating. And what you typically see when you look at these profiles is high green typically has lower red, right? They are interconnected, obviously. Another way of looking at and why we measure red and green is, let's say the person's not empowering, right? They're scoring low on green. We measure, do you get freedom and choice? Is your leader coaching and mentoring you? These are classic green zone questions. When the leader goes, well, okay, I'm not empowering, but what am I doing? The red zone explains what you're doing instead of the green. Oh, you're micromanaging people. You're hypercritical, right? You're driving unrealistic targets. Oh, that's what you do when you're not green zoning it. Does it make sense? And that's where it gives quality and clarity to that question. Oh, what am I not doing enough of? And when I'm not doing enough of that, what do I do instead? What are my habitual patterns that replace what I should be? Therefore, I need to reduce the red to increase the green. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you so much, Haley. Oh, lovely to see you, Haley. Love to have you here. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Adrienne. Yes, Lee, we are running training to become certified. We have a 4 half-day, it's already designed certification training. If you're in our database, which I assume you are, you will get a notification on this. And I'm super excited about that certification training because I think we've created a pretty sophisticated certification training for people that's, I think, a lot more sophisticated than I'm going to make a self-promoting competitive statement. I'm just like censoring myself, but we're super proud of the certification training we've designed, and I think will add tremendous value and new insights to people. Let me just stop there without making competitive comparison statements. Thanks, John. Thanks for attending. Okay, guys, sorry I'm over time. I really appreciate you attending to the end. And I hope you got some value, not just about the data, but also, you know, about the challenging work of leadership development and organizational development. And we're really looking forward to working with more coaches. We're making this available to coaches and giving them support. And not only that, helping them with sophisticated debrief packages that are beautifully integrated so they can really relax into assessing into profound development growth for leaders in a beautifully structured way for themselves and internal coaches, of course, too. Okay. Julian, how do I end the webinar?